You're about to hear a first. This is the first time in 24 years I've preached from Philemon.
No.
Have any of you ever heard the phrase, make yourself useful and fill in the blank? Huh? Make yourself useful. Often those words are spoken by someone who is totally unwilling to be of any use whatsoever to anyone at any time. Like, make yourself useful and bring me a beer, he said from the recliner in front of the widescreen TV. No doubt it's our job as human beings to find a need and fill it, serve it or make it better. And telling other people to make themselves useful is probably not where we need to start. How can you be of use for the benefit of others? You know, we all want to know that we have a purpose, that we're useful. You know, we tend to define our lives by what we do, what we accomplish, what we achieve. I'm a school teacher, I'm a nurse, I'm a preacher, I'm a truck driver. We tend to define ourselves by what it is that we do. Tomorrow is Labor Day. And this is an opportunity to think about what brings value to our lives. Are we in service? Or is it more likely that we're out of service? Are we contributing, or are we allowing life to pass by? Are we engaged or idle? Do we feel that we're full of use? In this short letter, which Ralph read in almost its entirety, today we're introduced to Philemon, who is a slave owner and a runaway slave, Onesimus, whose name actually in Greek means useful. And Philemon appears to have an ongoing relationship with Paul. The letters addressed to him and the leaders of the church that meets in his house. It's likely that Paul founded this congregation on one of his missionary journeys, or at least visited and preached there. Onesimus is Philemon's slave who ran away and somehow found his way to Paul. Now, the letter doesn't go into details of what happened between the slave and the slave owner, but it seems to indicate that in running away, he may have taken something of his owners with him. But rather than dwelling on the past, Paul's interested in the future. Onesimus, the slave, you see, is a different person, changed by the grace of God. And during his time with Paul, Onesimus has come to faith in Jesus Christ and becomes convinced that he needs to return to Philemon, his master. In fact, he probably delivers this letter to the one who owns him and would be expected to treat him harshly. Returning, you see, to Philemon was considered the right thing to do in that day, and legally that was where Onesimus belonged. Unfortunately, Paul never addresses the injustices of slavery in this letter. Slavery, you see, was understood to be the cultural norm, which Paul, Philemon, and Onesimus, and most everyone at that time, simply accepted. Paul does, however, write about Onesimus in ways that one would have not talked about a slave in those days. He affectionately describes how he became Onesimus' father in the faith, and how Onesimus has captured his heart. And Paul is so impressed with him that he tells Philemon he considered asking him to stay with him. You have to remember, Paul's in prison as he's writing this letter. Paul, bound in prison, clearly has that soft spot in his heart for Onesimus. And perhaps for all, we don't know, but perhaps for all who are being held in the bonds of slavery. Well, Paul never overtly condemns slavery as a sin. He appeals to Philemon, and to Philemon's faithfulness to and his love for Jesus and all God's people in this letter. He asks Philemon to forgive and receive Onesimus not as a slave, but as a brother, as though he were Paul himself. Paul even offers to pay whatever Onesimus might have taken when he ran away. Paul seeks to convince Philemon that his and Onesimus' social statuses as slave owner and slave no longer apply. All that really matters is that they are siblings in Christ Jesus, brothers in Christ. In verse 11, Paul offers Philemon a new way of seeing Onesimus and himself. You know, Philemon must have been a man of some means. He's wealthy and has enough social status to have slaves, and he also has a home, a house that's large enough for church meetings. Onesimus is identified only as a slave. His value is seen in only what he does to serve Philemon and his household. And Paul nails it when he tells Philemon that Onesimus has been useless to him while he was away, and possibly even before he left. And then Paul refocuses Philemon's view by pointing out how Onesimus is now useful to both of them. Not as a slave, but as a brother, a fellow disciple. Onesimus' former social status is dissolved in Christ, and so too is Philemon's. Paul's appeal that all human beings are of inherent worth may seem an obvious one today. In the time of Paul, Philemon, and Onesimus, however, it would have been considered radical. The notion that two people from very different social statuses could be equal was unheard of. Yet for Paul, this was the heart of the gospel of Jesus Christ. If you remember, he writes in Galatians 3:28, there is no longer Jew or Greek. There is no longer slave or free. There is no longer male or female. For all are one in Christ Jesus. You know, today we might not struggle with the issue of slavery, but many of us, however, struggle with trying to find our self-worth outside of our work. The holiday we celebrate grew out of laborers' desire to be valued beyond their jobs, and to have lives that they could live beyond their work. The history of Labor Day goes back to a demonstration by the Central Labor Union on Tuesday, September 5th, 1882 in New York City. At that time, the average work week for a full-time manufacturing employee was 100 hours. That works out to 14 hours per day, 7 days per week. Imagine working from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. every day. Every day. That doesn't leave much time for anything else, does it? The 8-hour workday and the 40-hour work week didn't come into effect until 1940. Yet many of us struggle to find a balance between our work and the rest of our lives. Even as we celebrate Labor Day, we might be tempted to peek at email or check our office voicemail just to be sure we haven't missed anything important. Dawn and I will be leaving this afternoon, going into Morgantown to stay all night with our friends Rich and Carolyn. Their Labor Day cookout is tomorrow afternoon at 2. Between now and the time we get back, I'll probably check my voicemail on my cell phone 8 or 10 times, just to make sure there hasn't been an emergency back here in the faith community that calls itself Glendale. We want to believe that our lives are more than what we do. Yet our inability to disengage from our jobs tells us a different story. We still tend to measure our lives by what we do, our roles, our jobs, our informal social status. Some of us view ourselves much in the same way Philemon once viewed Onesimus, only useful at work. Onesimus was once useful, but is now useful, or full of use. He found his true self in his usefulness. He's no longer a slave whose sole purpose is to serve Philemon. Instead, Onesimus is a disciple of Jesus Christ. Called like Philemon, called like Paul, to serve Christ by serving others. We too are full of use, whether we are employed, unemployed, or underemployed. Whether we have much or little, whether we feel frustrated or satisfied with our work, whether our employer appreciates us or not, whether we feel empowered or powerless. We are full of use, folks, as disciples of Jesus Christ, called to serve Him in our everyday living. We're full of use. We're full of use when we help flood victims. We're full of use when we drive folks to appointments. We're full of use when we work at the soup kitchen. We're full of use when we build wheelchair ramps, when we pack backpacks with food, and many other services that this congregation provides. Our lives are not measured by what we do in our jobs. Instead, we are measured by our usefulness to Christ. Whether we feel like Onesimus, Philemon, or Paul, our usefulness to Christ is how we're measured. That runs counter to our culture today. It runs counter to what the school board says. It runs counter to what the administrators say at the hospital or at the bank. It runs counter sometimes to what my bishop or my district superintendent has to say. Our usefulness is measured in how useful we are for Jesus Christ. On this Labor Day, we can commit ourselves to finding our usefulness in Christ rather than in our jobs. We are more than our jobs, although I had an employer one time who didn't think so. We are more than our jobs. We are full of use for Christ and Christ's kingdom. Thanks be to God. Would you pray with me? Here we are, God, gathered on another Sunday here at Glendale, ready to step outside this building and back into the world again. Fill us with your Spirit. Strengthen us for use here in our lives on this earth. Strengthen us for use, God, that your kingdom might come, that your will might be done here on earth as it is in heaven.